I decided this was the appropriate meme for the background.
I don't like it.
Guys, I don't. Does that look like the face of a world-class hacker to you? I don't know. He's
Yeah,
looking a little.
let me take away the background. Hang on. You'll see my podcast camera. It'll look a little bit more legitimate. There you go.
Nice. All right, so I want to jump in. We have about 40 minutes, so I want to get right down to business. So this is Borski. He claims his first name is Michael, but nobody knows him as such.
Well, my mother claims my first name is Michael, and so does my birth certificate, but not so much me.
No, not you at all. Why don't you give a really quick breakdown on, your background, your kind of different positions you've held, and then the gap, the years in which we can't discuss anything you did. Like, let's just trace some parameters real quick to get a handle on you.
Sure. I'll give you some context. So my name is Michael Borochovsky. Shut up, Siri. Geez, sorry. My name is Michael Borochovsky. Most people call me Borski. You'll find very few people call me Michael, other than occasionally Greg and my mom. I wrote my first line of code when I was like 9 years old. Got into security nominally when I was about 13, mostly because I wanted to play games and didn't have the money to pay for them. And so figured out how to make that happen anyway. Then I discovered that while I was pretty good at sports, I was really awful at video games. But my friends all really liked video games. So tried to figure out how to play video games without actually playing video games, and ended up writing a lot of cheats for video games, which is how I got into security in the first place. That and getting to play them for free, cracking them. Over time, that sort of developed into a real interest. And then I spent a couple of years working for Morgan Stanley through a story that is better told over beers. I then went to MIT, studied computer science. You don't really focus at MIT, but most of my classes were in security and usability, or some combination thereof. And spent a lot of time working at places like Apple and Mandiant and so on and so forth, a couple of banks and whatnot. And then after MIT, went to the DC metro area to do, and this is what Greg was referring to, is to do offensive software security for the intelligence community, which is a really buzzwordy way of saying I did vulnerability discovery, exploit development, and exploit weaponization for a few years, and then started Tinfoil Security back in 2011, which was a company that helps developers find and fix vulnerabilities much earlier on in the development process, helping them to basically make it much faster and much easier to find vulnerabilities that they're building into their own software before it becomes a problem either that the security team or that the public has to deal with. Ran that for 9 years, just sold it to Synopsys in January of this year, of 2020. I was going to say this year, but actually a year ago today. Literally today is the 1 year anniversary of having sold to Synopsys. And yeah, been there since, and trying to, over the last year, obviously COVID has had a large effect on anything I was able to do, but been doing some angel investing and working on some new stuff.
So that answers the first question about whether I use real hackers or not. And so how this goes quite often is
I was amused that the title of this was Gregg Hurwitz and hacker.
Yeah. I don't like to share the limelight, Borski. It's all about me. You're like a character player, So Borski, as you can see, is a friend. Also, we actually met first through a contact who's a former SEAL Team 8 member.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said to him, I need somebody to get into the hacking stuff. I need to throw scenarios at him. And so he introduced us. And we met a bunch and we talked a bunch. And now from time to time, I'll call him and I'll say, here's a scenario that I need. I'm not proficient in, I can't write code. I'm not proficient in tech talk. And so if I can bridge the gap when Borski talks really animatedly and caffeinatedly about what it is that he's doing quite brilliantly, and I make him translate it and put it in terms that I understand, that's the connection process for me to write something I think that you guys understand. Excuse me. So I'll often call him and say, look, here's the scenario. I need Evan to, penetrate this kind of compound. I need some kind of physical item that needs to be put here. How do we build it, right? Here's the scenario. Here's the way that I see it. Often I'll give him a really bad first draft of what that scene is, of like, then he takes the floober and plugs it into and then Borski goes through and not only will make better and smarter everything that I do, But often we'll have other suggestions about, well, what if the network is like this and you need this hurdle? And so it adds to that thing that I've always said, that a lot of research is a process of discovery. It's not just that I have the whole map and I'm coloring by numbers to fill it in. Like my ability, and you saw last week, I talked to my buddy Bravo, who's a weapons expert. We've talked to different experts. It's a discovery process. They know the whole world, right? I have to talk to them about what that little tip of the iceberg is that's going to poke up into the story. And Borski's been amazing at that. So I have a question for you, Borski, right? The first question is, can you explain to us the different hats of hackers, black, white, red, and gray?
Yeah, totally. You can also add tinfoil hat in there, which is why we named our company that. So the concept is actually not, I actually don't love it. But the concept at a high level is very simple, right? Black hat hackers are evil, attempting to steal money or data or information for personal gain, right? White hat hackers are those that are, folks that are participating in like bug bounties, right? Just folks that are finding vulnerabilities, disclosing them to the companies that have them, trying to either be a good Samaritan or get a payout from the bug bounty, but not selling it on the black market, not stealing the data and trying to make money by using credit card numbers and so on. A gray hat hacker is someone who's kind of in between, right? So there's a number of folks that do things like find a vulnerability and then report it to the company. And if the company refuses to fix it, right, then they'll go public with it, or they'll use it for personal gain. Those that go public with it are still typically considered white hat hackers, because at the end of the day, they're trying to do good for the world, which is disclose a vulnerability, get it fixed, and so on. Or at the very least, if they can't get it fixed, disclose it so that people are aware of it. Because one of the things that people misunderstand often is that just because a vulnerability hasn't been disclosed doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? If a vulnerability is there and has been discovered by anyone, turns out that same vulnerability can likely be discovered by someone else who will use it for personal gain and profit at your expense.
Yeah.
And so when a company refuses to fix the vulnerability because they think it's not real, or they, whatever, they're too busy trying to shore up their Q4 reports, whatever it is, sometimes the only recourse is to disclose it publicly and let everybody know so that everybody's on the same playing field, right?
So somebody asked if I ever ask you something that is just not possible, and your answer was?
All the time. The trick is to make it possible anyway. So Gregg sometimes has these like crazy ideas, right? And sometimes they make sense, and other times they make sense from a literary perspective, but perhaps not from a physics or an actual things that can be done perspective. And so, I sort of see it as my job a little bit to take those ideas, and this was actually honestly a large part of what we did in the USG, right? Was we spent a lot of time with, we had very few specific customers, right? They lived in a bunch of forts in Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina. But we had very specific requests from them, some of which, in fact, almost all of which at the time were not possible. And so we would engage in these research projects where we were literally trying to attempt to find an exploit, or a vulnerability rather, that then we could write an exploit for that previously didn't exist. Because, in the business we were doing, we were looking for zero-day vulnerabilities, which meant that nobody had seen these before to our knowledge. Nobody had used these before to our or the company's knowledge. Now, that was actually pretty good training for when Gregg is like, how do I drop a USB key down a pipe through a 2-inch, filter into a printer that then prints out the whatever, right? Like whatever the literary thing needs to happen, you figure out a way to either work around it or make it happen.
My first time, a lot of times I'll call Borski just to hear what he's playing with or aggravated about, because his rants are like literary gold for me. And so I've
started doing this on Twitter now, and apparently I'm gaining followers. So I don't know. Apparently I yell a lot, and people don't see.
Are you on Borski on Twitter?
Just Borski, yeah.
Okay. But I remember this way back when I wrote the Kill Clause, which came out in 2004. So I wrote it. I must have written that in 2002. Let's call it. And I wrote about how like everyone's cell phone has these GPS chips in them for global positioning satellites. And I remember like the whole publicity team then I was with HarperCollins then was like up in arms because they couldn't believe it. And like, this was this new technology we had to talk about. It's amazing the progression of technology, what we take for granted, what we shorthand now, and what we just understand. Anyone turns on a phone, everybody has an immediate understanding of what that means now, whereas that was considered cutting edge research. So a lot of times I'll talk to Borsky to figure out, what's the stuff that's going to be common knowledge 5 years from now, right? And then if I can get that stuff into a book now, it feels very cutting edge and like we're riding the crest of the thing. Patricia Rose asks, Joey is a tech genius. We all know this, but is it really possible for her to hack into police, state, and federal law enforcement sites?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
It's that simple. Is it trivial? Will it happen in 12 seconds like it does in the books or like it does in the movies? No, right? But is it possible? I mean, yeah, it is literally people's jobs out there right now in other countries that are not this one to attack our federal government and our local governments.
You saw the solar panel news, all this that's been breaking with Russia?
I haven't. What was the news?
Going in through solar networks to access.
That's a good idea.
There's a bunch that's rolling out, but we've been a little bit busy with insurrection at the state capitol. But
yeah, I've been paying a lot more attention to what's happening in DC than anything else this week. But yeah. Sorry, what was the question?
Well, new question now from Patricia Rose. Now, this one I think is to me. What about Joey and her obsession with Rubik's Cubes and other puzzle toys? Is that relevant to her hacking skill, or are they completely different elements of her personality?
I want to see if I have.
Oh, really? Do you have one?
I don't know.
Well, I just made this up because for me, it was something. I had a friend come over. I played softball, and one of my friend's kids had one of these unbelievably elaborate cubes that I'd never seen. I could barely do a Rubik's Cube. I could get like one side of a Rubik's Cube, and then I
don't have a Rubik's Cube, but I'm a big fan of Legos and things like this. I have all of these fidget toys on my desk right now, right? I've got this bobblehead of Groot because he's awesome. I've got like 3 fidget spinners with various speeds. I've got my little train that I got from a customer one year. Yeah, we all have these sort of like, a lot of us have these sort of like weird things. I make metal 3D puzzles because they're fun. My buddy downstairs, Nate, who lives in my in-law unit, who is also a security guy who works for me, he like collects and does Rubik's Cubes of all various kinds.
Yeah.
Polygonal Rubik's Cubes that I'd never even seen before.
Yeah, those are the ones that I saw with Joey. And I just thought there's something about that like nervous system wired to constant movement and constant traction and constant distraction. So I had a friend of mine whose kid was playing with this Rubik's Cube that was like, 16 tall and 16 wide. And he was just spinning it into different shapes. And I thought it's a lot of how, in my mind, it's funny that Borsky and I've never actually talked about this till this question was raised. But in my head, it was a lot of how a hacker's mind would work about code and pattern recognition and moving patterns. And she does it sort of subconsciously to have something to do.
Yeah. The subconsciousness of it is, I think, the important part, right? For me, because when I'm sitting there thinking about like a problem or whatever, my typical thing is I'll pull out my uke or something, right? And like, just sort of like, just like mess around on it while I'm thinking, just because it sort of helps like remove the thought behind it, right? I'll just sort of like, and that leads to one of 2 things, right? Either I come up with a solution to the problem, or I realize that I'm just enjoying playing ukulele and I'll do that instead for a little while and get my mind off things, or I'll go take a shower or something, right? But it's just something to sort of, it's when I don't know if you've ever tried to like do orienteering in the forest, right? Or in the woods. If you spend 100% of your time focused on how to get out, you'll forget about the fact that you need to figure out how to actually make it through until you get out, right? And I think it's important to sort of take a dime and just stop, relax for a minute, and then come back to the problem in a new way. And I think that's largely what something like a Rubik's Cube or a fidget spinner or a ukulele or whatever you can have that just sort of helps exert that nervous energy and that frankly anxious and overexcited and frustrated energy when you're trying to solve a problem, because you don't know what the answer is. If you did, you wouldn't need any of these fidget toys, right?
You know, when they did a poll of CEOs, they found that CEOs are visionaries for major companies. The biggest thing that they were missing was alone time, like
Yeah.
time away, because when you're a CEO, and you know this, right? You get pulled in, and then you're on a treadmill, and you're problem solving, and you're accessible, and you're constantly putting out fires. And the ability to have to step back and just go for, and not necessarily corporate retreat, just time that's all the way alone, to repurpose and to reorient towards the 40,000 foot view is so essential. And so there's ways we have to do it in small ways, I think, for workflow, for coding, for everything. Yeah, Lucas said like Sherlock playing the violin. That's exactly right.
Yeah, it's similar, right? Or crocheting while talking with someone. It's exactly that, right? It's just something to keep your physical being occupied while your brain works.
So we have a question here from Terry Cantrell. Which countries have the best of the best hackers?
Good question. So the U.S. is definitely on top of the list. You know, it's hard to rank at the very top. It's there are some high schools that have such great students that they just refuse to rank, because you could have a 97 average and still be like 300th, right? It's a little bit like that, right? It's hard to rank the top three or whatever. But I can tell you the countries that do well are historically the U.S., Israel is very high up there, Russia, China, Korea. Korea is surprisingly good. And then out of nowhere, Bulgaria always appears. Specifically, Bulgaria and Romania are constantly engaged in what I would describe as sort of low-hanging fruit, like you know, finding credit card numbers on the web, selling them on the black market, things like that.
So I have, let me look. There's a question here that says, have I had people approach me, this is from Jackie, from government authorities over sites or activity I've been involved with while researching scenarios and ideas? I have not. I will say, when I was writing Out of the Dark, which involves, you know, that was my homage to the Day of the Jackal, where Orphan X is going after the highly corrupt president of the United States. And I was convinced, I mean, I did a lot of Secret Service. I was grabbing, you know, blueprints of presidential limo. I was looking into the sort of tech capabilities, the electronic noses in the White House. And then I was doing Google searches that had things like, which hotel has the best balcony with a sight line to the White House? And I was convinced I was going to get a visit, you know, from authorities, but I never did. So question for Borsky. Is it legit that Jody could have learned what she knows by being a lonely kid on the internet and whatever limited training she got while in the orphan program?
Yeah, I'm gonna couple that with the other question, which was where to go. Is everything that happens in the books actually possible? Because they're related. So the answer to the first one is yes. Sorry, the answer to the second one is yes. Everything is possible for the most part, because we spend so much time. Well, frankly, I owe Gregg a manuscript, but we generally spend a lot of time. Gregg in particular spends a ton of time trying to ensure that things are real. And the one time actually that I screwed something up because it wasn't in my wheelhouse. I don't know if Gregg, I'm sure you remember this. This was like the GPS thing. Yeah. Like I know about GPS. I've spent a lot of time studying it, but I'm not a munitions positioning expert. Like that's not what I do. And so there was some dude who like was a professor somewhere. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, but like was a professor somewhere. Like his PhD thesis was in like targeting GPS coordinates or whatever for missiles. And that was exactly what Gregg was doing. And he sent in a correction, and I was like, damn it, I missed one, right? Like those. I
got a call from Borsky, because Borsky doesn't. You're right that you never give up. So we did some of these calculations, and I called him, and we figured it out. You know, that's one of the places where sometimes the weapons and munitions meets with the technology. And Borsky gave me the coordinates, and then the guy got the thing. So the next thing I know, I got a Zoom request from Borsky. And I pull up my computer, and you were with like 3 guys from your company and a whiteboard. You'd been working on the problem all day. You were so mad
that sounds about right.
But
it was me and Quinn, actually, I think. Yeah.
Was it? Yeah. So it was funny though, because you know it was. I get stuff all the time. I got, you know, the other thing is the books are there forever. Like I got an email today about the first Orphan X book, where he communicates with Jack through unsent drafts of Gmails, right? But when General Petraeus was, you know, arrested. Well, I don't know if he was arrested when he was prosecuted for sharing secrets. He
Yeah.
had used that, and unsent drafts and emails do still go over the internet, and it's not a secure method.
Yep.
Well, it's in the first Orphan X book. I'm past the point that I can rewrite that whole thing because it's not like I can change one word in future printings. But
it looks like you knew ahead of time. Yeah.
Right. What'd you say?
I said, but it looks like you knew ahead of time.
Yeah, but it's funny because they're saying, look, this isn't that safe a route that Evan and Jack are communicating, right? So it's a misstep that I would have corrected here 6 years later, but I can't.
What's funny is that, so I will still answer that question. But what's funny is that people I think don't think about this enough, right? Like if you write something into a web browser, right, into a Gmail draft, if you can access it from a different computer without having rewritten it there, then by definition it has gone over the internet, which means that someone somewhere has the capability of seeing it because it's stored in a database.
Yeah.
Right? By definition, by moving computers, you have now proven that it is stored somewhere.
Are the odds any lower than if it's sent? If you just say
yeah, they are, right? So like when they're stored as a draft, they're effectively stored on Google's servers, right? When it's sent, it's traveling across the internet to whatever email you've chosen to send it to. And that might be Google, and it might still, stick within Google, or it might be that you chose to send it to AOL, and now AOL has a copy of the email on their servers.
Oh, so then it time travels too.
Right. So
AOL joke, Borsky.
No, I know. I still have their coasters somewhere.
Do you?
I use the old.
I have a bunch of friends still on AOL, by the way.
My fiance was on AOL until
it's like a branding statement to go retro.
Hey, my mother is still on AOL. You can contact her that way. Don't tell anyone I said that.
Okay.
So the answer to the other question about how you get started, right? Yeah, anybody can listen. I didn't. When I was 9, there was no book on security. There was no. I read my sister's. My sister was going to an associate's program in computer science that she hated, and she was going only because my mother made her. And I read her book because I was interested and bored. And then I taught her COBOL, which I don't know if any of you know about COBOL, but it's awful. COBOL is the think of it as the mainframe language for banking. It's still in use today, but a lot less so. In any case, that was sort of how I got started, right? If you wanted to get started in security now, you actually don't even need a ton of programming experience. Programming experience helps, but getting started on programming is relatively straightforward nowadays. There's a lot of online resources. Getting started in security is even easier. There's this concept in security called CTF, or capture the flag. Capture the flag is actually, you see a sign behind me of a Korean capture the flag that we played after we won DEF CON CTF in 2012.
Why don't you explain what that is?
Yeah, so capture the flag is this concept where it comes in two forms. There's Jeopardy style and there's attack defense. Jeopardy style is very simple to explain. You get literally a 5x5 or so Jeopardy style board, and you get 25 or so challenges that come in various forms, right? Sometimes they're web apps, sometimes they're binaries that you need to reverse, sometimes they're binaries that you need to exploit, and sometimes they're just various crypto and trivia challenges. You solve those, you submit what's called a flag, or something that you got at the end of solving that challenge, and then you get points for it. That's one style, is called Jeopardy. Another style is what's called the attack defense style of CTF. And so the attack defense style is you're given it varies in exact terms, but you're given either a set of services or you're given a box, a virtual machine that has a set of services on it, that you then need to both figure out what the services are. You need to figure out how to attack them, but at the same time, you also need to figure out how to patch and defend them. Because everybody, let's say 20 teams, get the same sets of services or the same box. And so they're all working on now attacking each other and also defending themselves from being attacked. And a lot of times these services will have multiple vulnerabilities. That's the more advanced kind of CTF. To get started on the much, the simpler, do it on your own time, start learning some security kind, there's a lot of resources, right? So my favorite resource by far for learning this is microcorruption.com. I'll put it in the chat here. The beautiful part about microcorruption is it doesn't require any tooling. What it does is it gives you in the browser a disassembly of the idea behind every challenge in microcorruption is you're trying to unlock an electronic lock that in order to gain access into something, right? And so they give this lock runs on what's called an MSP 430, which is a particular type of microcontroller that has a really, really simple instruction set. There's only like 10 or 11 or 12 instructions. And so it's really limited in what you can do with it, which makes it a great teaching tool. But the nice part about it is that a ton of IoT devices run on MSP 430s or similar. So once you go through these like 20 challenges, now you effectively know how to start attacking actual IoT devices, at least the ones that run on this architecture.
So you guys, Borsky, I'm going to cut in real quick to say you can understand now why like accessing the Borsky brain can be very dangerous. It's like putting your finger into an electrical socket. And so part of my job is to have this whole conversation with Borsky, see if I can understand the parameters of it, and then get it boiled down to a particular deployed thing within the plot, you know, because he's got so much knowledge about the ways that all of these things work, right? And all the limitations and all the possibilities. And it's one of the real joys for me of pulling in consultants is I get to talk to people. One of the lines I have that Jack tells Evan when he's a kid is he says, your job is to learn a little bit about everything from people who know everything about one thing. And so like Evan's training is sort of like mine. Evan doesn't know as much about hacking as Joey, right? I'll never know what Borsky knows in his pinky fingernail. I will never know as much about hacking. But I can call him and go, here's the scenario, and he gives me all this, and then I try and figure out how we boil it down and make it kind of grabbable. And that's a lot of the fun. It's like being a perennial student, kind of dilettante student, right? I never have to get PhD level the way he is. But that's a lot of the back and forth we have.
What's funny is I actually work a lot of the same way, just in a different discipline, right? Look, I'm not an expert on cryptography, right? I know a lot about it, but you know, I'm not the guy who's going to sit down and reverse a piece of crypto. I don't know a lot about cloud deployment. Like I know enough to be dangerous, but I don't know a ton about it. What I do know though is I know a ton of people who are experts on it, right? I mean, I have lived my whole life simply trying not to give up in the pursuit of like random curiosity. And so yeah, I mean, you pull in consultants to assist with your writing. I don't pull in consultants, so to speak, but like I have always spent my whole life trying to basically be a breadth first. I spent my whole life doing a breadth first search of knowledge, if you will. And so I'm like pretty deep in a couple of, you know, individual sort of disciplines like writing exploits and vulnerability discovery and RE and things like that. And like all the stuff I've learned from running a business, but you know, I'm not an expert on a bunch of topics. I just happen to know experts on other topics.
What's interesting that I found a little bit is that if you can become an expert in one arena all the way down, no matter what it is, you know, whether that's being a professional athlete, right? Whether that's being an elite operator, whether that's in hacking, whether it's in writing, if you really do that in earnest all the way down, I think the time to delve into and achieve not equivalent, but expertise, let's just say in other arenas gets quicker. And the more that you have, the more you can start to see how the same sort of patterns for learning and the same problem recognition come up. So that a problem that you might have, you know, physically as an athlete is similar to a kind of jam you might have in your company as a CEO, is similar to a kind of exploit that you're trying to deal with, right? In terms of computer technology, you start to recognize the more that you do. I mean, I think that's the point and basis of a liberal arts education. In a lot of ways, for me, what Evan is and what his training is, I always say he's Ulysses. He's the man of many wiles. He's not the biggest guy like Reacher. He's not the best shot, right? Well, he's not, you know, the suavest guy like James Bond, let's say, but he's like second or third in all these different categories. And so the totality of that, it's sort of like being a Renaissance man without any of the pretension is how I think of it. Right.
It's honestly part of the reason I love the book so much. Right. So like, I mean, speaking as me, again, I've spent my whole life trying to do that. Right. So I'm the guy who, you know, worked in the intelligence community for a few years, but also had a stint in the summer on Broadway, right? Like I have this sort of dual life of music and theater and, you know, staring at bits and bytes. And I think that's actually helped a ton. I find that there are, part of it might be the fact that, you know, I was diagnosed with ADD last year and I definitely have it. So there's that. But, part of it might also just be the fact that by not sort of specializing in one particular thing, it gives me the ability to be able to see the forest. Whereas a lot of people who are really over specialized see exactly what they know. And I can sort of take like 3 or 4, I describe myself as sort of a catalyst, right? I can take sort of 3 or 4 people and like build something bigger out of all of the things that they know just by sort of finding patterns and putting them together. I know that sounds really abstract, but
so Bob Lee Swagger, that is indeed the name I was looking for the best shot. It left my head.
Great show, by the way.
Yeah. But so, we tend to gravitate towards all that. And it's been very interesting for me because my conception of Evan is really that he like assimilates and accommodates a lot of different things and brings it to bear. And part of that is there's a line in the book to me that's so important that Jack, when he's 12 years old, skinny, scrawny, smallest kid in the foster home, and he says to Jack, "Why'd you choose me?" And Jack says, "You know what it's like to be powerless. I want someone who knows that in their bones and never forgets that." And that in some ways is sort of it's like the fail safe for him ever becoming a tyrant or a true believer, right? Because he came from so little. And so part of what he has to do is he hates bullies, he hates abusers, he hates tyrants, right? So he's up against it. When you're up against something that's a vast system, he's often up against, criminal enterprises, cartels. He's up against the US government all the time, where there's a lot of inbuilt corruption and complication and impossibility. The path to navigate it, you have to take in all sorts of sort of skills and observations to navigate your way through these more complex threats and missions. And so it's very important to me that he can pick up the phone and call Tommy Stojak. He can pick up the phone and call Joey. He can pick up the phone and call Melinda Trong, right, who's the world's, phenomenal counterfeiter. And he's got a bit of knowledge in all these fields, but he has to be open to all of it. And his job is to take it all of it in, and then like Ulysses, lead to do something that's good in the face of impossibility.
Honestly, an idea for a future book, he would make a fantastic CEO. Right. I mean, that's the definition of what a CEO does, right? Is you look at Elon Musk, and he's not an expert at really much of anything. He's just an expert at collecting experts and getting them to do their best work.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And we have, that's right. So do you guys have any questions for those of you live that you want to unmute and ask either me or Borski? Has anyone got something? All right, we have very shy people. I think everyone's worried that there's a level of Evan designing electric cars, somebody said. So Borski, is there any story that's not classified that you can tell about some of your ventures in the dark underworld?
Well, there was the time I almost created an international incident. That was fun. Actually, I'll tell you one. I'll tell you one that's really funny. So I was with.
Are you going to tell that one or no?
I'll tell. Well. There's 2 times that I almost created an international incident. One time was my fault.
So here's the plan. Let's get those 2 stories. You guys think if you have any questions while he tells these stories, and then we can go to the questions and then bring it to a close. So let's hear the 2 times.
I'll tell you the one where my friend almost created an international incident. So we were actually at this conference right here. It's called Secu Inside in Korea. We were playing the CTF. We were also giving a bunch of talks. Actually, there's 2 stories here. So we were also giving a bunch of talks, and Quinn and I, one of my closest friends, were giving a talk on multi-platform shellcode. It's this concept where, so different programs run on different architectures, right? You've got some that run on ARM, some that run on Intel. Now you've got a bunch, like all the new Macs are running on Apple Silicon, right? They've created their own processors. You might have read about it. And so when you attack each of these individual architectures, you need to write what's called shellcode, right? You write a new exploit with a new set of shellcode that executes on that architecture. Problem is these architectures they're not interchangeable. And so, what works on ARM isn't going to work on MIPS, which isn't going to work on Intel x86. And so there's this concept of something called multi-platform shellcode, which we came up with due to a challenge actually from a CTF, where we came up with a graph algorithm to devise a method for coming up with multi-platform shellcode, where you write shellcode once and it runs across all architectures. So we were going to present that, but it was kind of we were sort of done with it. We had already done that challenge. It was exciting. We hadn't actually put together the presentation yet. That very night, we discovered that we were sitting in the Intercontinental in Seoul, beautiful hotel, and we discovered that the rooms all had bathrooms, and in the bathrooms there were all toilets and bidets. We also discovered that there was one massive remote control in the center of the room that controlled the TVs, and the, the beds could go up and down or whatever it was, and also turned on and off the bidets. So Quinn went and used the restroom once, and she was in my room, and I hit the bidet button, and all you heard was this like scream from the other side of the room. Because I mean, in bidets, I don't know if you've ever used them, but like presumably there are ways to control temperature or something. I wasn't doing any of that. I just hit on and max and called it a day, and then it worked. And so then we sat there capturing and sending packets for the next hour, discovering that all of these hotel rooms were actually on the same subnet, and that with just a single packet, I could actually deploy everyone's bidets if I wanted to. Well, not a single packet per room. So we didn't do it, but we almost changed our talk to be how we showed up in Seoul and hacked a bunch of bathrooms in a hotel, right?
By the way, new book idea, Orphan X in the case of the bidet hacking.
But this is exactly what it is, right? This is exactly what it is. If you can get on the network, you can control not only bidets, we had access to their TVs, we had access to all sorts of things, right? It was totally unsecured. And they were using a static authentication key that they were passing as with every packet. So this is actually exactly what I'm talking about. We got curious about the bidets, started attacking them, and discovered that was a beachhead into everything else. Because you don't, if your bidets are connected to the internet, you've started from problems, right? But anyway, so the real fun was at the CTF. We're playing the CTF, and it's a 24-hour CTF, and we're pretty much the only like English speaking people there, right? It's a world CTF. They've got a bunch of Korean teams. They've got a Chinese team, a Russian team. They've got us representing the US, right? Because we won DEF CON CTF. So other teams had won other various CTFs from around the world. We start hacking, and look, this CTF had rules. I don't know if you know anything about me yet, but I don't really like rules. I mean, I appreciate that they exist. Siri, I'm gonna throw you against the wall. I appreciate that rules exist. However, I just don't. I want other people to follow them. And so what ended up happening was there was this rule, a team size limit of 4 people. Samurai, the team that I play on and the team that I captain, is a team of teaching. We have like 300 people on the team, the vast majority of which are just there to sort of lurk and learn, right? Don't actually play actively in CTFs. But we wanted to expose more than 4 people to this CTF because we were treating it as a learning exercise, right? Didn't matter if we won or not. We just wanted people to learn. So we did that. So we opened up a tunnel back to the US so that people could look at problems. One of our illustrious players in the US, in Maryland, decided that he had found a secret challenge. That secret challenge, after he had found the vulnerability and then exploited it, turned out to be a Korean Cyber Command email server, which we didn't know. We had no idea. He had no idea. How would he have known? Turns out that when they sent us one of the binaries, it had attached onto it an encrypted blob, right? And when we decrypted what the encrypted blob was, we discovered that it was actually a connect back to some server. And this to us meant, oh my God, secret challenge. No one else will find this. This is fantastic. We'll get extra points. Turns out their mail server had been compromised. But we didn't know this. And so when their mail server had sent out this binary to their team to then distribute to us, it had sent it out with this encrypted blob attached. And so we showed up at the conference and we ended up getting all these red flags. And so Quinn gets up and comes back, and then no fewer than like 8 or 9 Koreans walk up to our table of 4 people and go, which one of you is team captain? Now, all three of us have our headphones on, and poor Quinn doesn't. Sorry, 3 of us don't have our headphones on, and poor Quinn does, right? She's the only one that's like really working hard. And so we all three of us like look at the Koreans, look at Quinn, look at the Koreans, and then point at Quinn. Right? Mind you, Quinn's been on the team for 2 weeks, so Quinn has no idea what's happening. We assumed it was, there were a few like photo ops prior to this where you like go and whatever, stand in front of a podium, hold up a thing and take a picture. We assumed this was that. It wasn't. And so Quinn was gone for like an hour and we were all concerned. Eventually Quinn came back and just sits down at the computer and just starts typing. And we're like, is everything okay? What's going on? You've been gone for an hour of like a 12-hour or 24-hour CTF, whatever it was. She was like, can't talk, gotta type. And we were like, okay. Long story short, we ended up going into a room. It was me, Quinn, and then like 7 or 8 Koreans. Only one of whom was called, one of whose names was a guy named Beast. Still a good friend of mine and Quinn's. Really, really smart, really nice. He was the only one that spoke English. So we're sitting there, and poor Quinn is just getting yelled at in Korean, a language she doesn't understand. And it just goes on and on and on. They're just yelling at each other and then yelling at Quinn and then yelling at each other and then yelling at Quinn. And Quinn is just like, and then Beast turns to Quinn and goes, these are very serious allegations. Quinn goes, what allegations? What are we talking about? The whole time Quinn thinks we're going to get caught for cheating because we were because they were like, oh, they found our tunnel. We're in trouble. We're going to get caught for cheating and get disqualified. And we were like, all of that is fine. And so Quinn was ready to just come clean about the cheating. Quinn had no idea about the mail server thing. None of us had any idea until much later when Beast eventually explained why this was such a big deal and why they had to like take us into another room and have a conversation with us. Now here's where this story gets really good. 2 years later, we're at DEF CON running a party as tinfoil, something we do every year. And this guy, we invite, Yelp was a customer of ours at the time, so we invite Yelp to the party. And this intern from Yelp walks in and goes, is there a Quinn Wilton here? And we go, yes, who's asking? So we introduce them. And then he goes, you're the one. And Quinn goes, I'm sorry, the one? And the intern goes, yeah, so 2 years ago, I was an intern at the Korean Cyber Command and your picture was on the wall. And it turns out that we had created like a serious problem within South Korean Cyber Command because one of our players had discovered a secret challenge, which in retrospect ended up being a really good piece of information for South Korean Cyber Command because it turns out they had a compromised mail server, but not by us.
That's great. So you can see that this is part of my job that is the most fun, which is in the course of the day, I get to have conversations like this all day and pick up bits and pieces from lots of people who are immensely interesting and don't like rules. It's my favorite category of humans. So Borsky, it looks like we have a question from the wise and wonderful one. Do you see it there asking you about?
I was just about to answer it in the chat. The answer is probably all of them, right? So you'd probably start with the actual.
Why don't you rephrase, just state the question for people listening.
Exactly. So the question was, if you're attacking an infrastructure that's based on VMs rather than, actual machines, with different VLANs and subnets, would you attack the host, the switch, or the router? And the answer is all of the above, right? You start with whatever you think you might be able to get a beachhead with, probably starting with the host. If you can route to it, right? If you can route to the host, if you have access to the host, you probably have the best possible chance of getting into the client machines, the client VMs. If on the other hand you can't, well, then you could attack the router, right? We've seen vulnerabilities in plenty of routers, whether they're Cisco or MikroTik or pick your favorite, and same thing with switches, right? But yeah, I mean, the answer is this is something I like to sort of distinguish. There's two types of attackers. There's the low-hanging fruit attackers who are just looking to, as quickly as possible, obtain as much information as possible so that they can then sell it for as much as possible for the maximum amount of money, right? And those folks are just like trolling websites and just scraping websites and trying to like use existing known public CVEs, public vulnerabilities to just attack as many websites as possible and basically like collect as much information as possible and then sell it. these are unsophisticated attackers, right? These are folks that like you're only going to be vulnerable to if you haven't touched your software in a year, right, or 6 months or whatever. Then there are those folks who are sophisticated attackers, right? Whether it's a nation state or whether it's just someone who really doesn't like you, whatever it is. If there is a determined attacker, you should assume they will get in. And then it's a question of defense in depth, right? It's a question of trying to make sure that you secure the various layers of your posture, as opposed to just, trying your best to fight at all costs. Because remember that in the case of cyber warfare, for lack of a better term, an attacker only has to win once. Once an attacker wins once, that's it. It's game over. They've won, right? You have to win every single time. Like, my job is way easier than your job. As a result of having to win every single time, it really means that hygiene is really important, right? Is it guaranteed? Absolutely not. But if you have good hygiene and you are setting up separate VLANs for your IoT devices, and you are setting up, the right set of security controls, then you're probably pretty okay against, at the very least, the unsophisticated attackers. And if you've pissed off a nation state enough that they want to come after you, I wish you the best.
Well, I think we should close on the sixth commandment, which is question orders. That's a key tenet of Evan's, what Evan was taught. Rules are great, but rules also are very limiting. I feel like rules are a lot like armor. They protect and insulate us from damage, but they limit our flexibility. And so part of what he's learned is to shed some of the armor that he grew up with in order to have more flexibility as he moves forward. And so he needs the help of a lot of renegades and bad boys and girls to do so. I'm Borsky. It's always a blast talking to you.
It's a pleasure, man. It's always fun.
Thank you for showing up. Everyone else, all you Xers out there, thanks for coming on and for all your questions and the interest. And we'll catch you all next time.
And feel free to ping me if you guys have any additional questions on Twitter or Facebook, or I'm easy to find.
Okay.
Thanks very much.